Let's do this.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Listography. Jason and Kramzer here, and this is it. This is the big one. I've talked about this multiple times on the channel. I've been saying that I plan on doing this for a while. Probably a year ago I said this was on its way, and it didn't make it. But when I started doing the channel with Kramzer, we kind of planned on doing it early on. And then right before we did it, he announced another record was on the way, so we waited.
Well, Bob Dylan announced it. I didn't announce it.
Right. And I guess we should say this is Bob Dylan that we're doing. A lot of albums to get through. His Wikipedia page says he has 39 studio albums, but there are a few that kind of land in a little bit of a gray area. We are counting most of them. The only ones we are not counting are Dylan, the 1973. It's kind of a compilation. He had really little to no input on it. The record company just kind of threw it together. It's a bunch of covers. Not counting that one, and we're also not counting the Basement tapes, which may be a little disappointing to some people. I know a lot of people are big fans of that, but
I like it, but it is, yeah. We also, it's important to note, we don't have a set principle of what we count. It's just kind of a artist by artist.
I mean, we have sort of rough guidelines, and then we also just kind of go with what feels right and what feels like a studio album to us. So that leaves us with 37. So that's a lot. That's the most we've ever done. You may also notice that Joe's not here today. Not a big Bob Dylan fan. That doesn't exempt you from participating in Listography, but we didn't want the video to be 5 hours long, so we're letting him off the hook. Also, because of there being so many records to get through, we're changing the format slightly. We're going to basically present in groups of 5, so reveal 5 at a time until we get to the top 15, and then we'll go back and forth album by album. So yeah, Bob Dylan, one of my favorite artists of all time, easily top 10, maybe top 5. I don't think he has any albums that are really terrible. Obviously, some are better than others. Yeah, this is just like a monumental artist, extremely important in the history of songwriting and rock music and folk rock and folk. You have anything to add before we start counting them down?
I love him as well. Probably not as much as you. He's probably not going to sneak into my top 10. I do have, after this, having a hard time saying I love him because, I mean, if I'm being completely honest, going into this right now, there was probably 13 or 14 albums I've never listened to before. But that also means that I have listened to about 18 of them, which is a lot to give your love out to somebody. But I do feel guilty not knowing a lot of his stuff. That said, this was difficult. It was difficult to order them. It was difficult to listen to this much of an artist at one point. I don't love him any less, but I wouldn't mind not listening to him for 6 months after this. It is a lot. Basically, the albums that I really knew, I stuck to the side and just went back at the end. And then the stuff that I didn't know as well, I just did chronologically. A lot of the eras will just come down to how good are the songs and how many of them are on an album. That said, I'm going to kick it off. We're going to start with our bottom 2. So we're going to start at 37. My 37 is going to be Christmas in the Heart. What are you doing making a Christmas album, Bob Dylan? But thank God you didn't make it during your Saved phase, because it would have been really religious and preachy. And then my number 36 is Saved. All you need to know is the album cover, which is a big glowing heavenly finger of Jesus coming down to his followers. It starts off a little decent, but it's too much, too preachy. You feel like you're at church.
I really like the Born Again phase, which may be surprising, but we'll get to those later. My bottom 2 are going to be Down in the Groove at 37 and at 36, Under the Red Sky. In the case of Down in the Groove, I think it's his worst sounding record. Not only is it kind of like got that cheesy 80s production, but it just sounds bad, flat out. I don't think the drums sound good at all. And in the case of both of these records, I don't think they have his strongest songs or anywhere close to his strongest songs. On Under the Red Sky, Born in Time is a pretty good track, but nothing else that really knocks me out on either of these 2 records.
Agreed. Get to that shortly as we go into my next group of 5. Number 35, I've got Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. I like it a lot. It's a soundtrack album, and it's mostly music. There's nothing really bad about it, but you're taking away the mic and the lyrics in a lot of the album, which is kind of a no-no for a Bob Dylan album. And I also don't think Knockin' on Heaven's Door is one of his best hits. Number 34, I've got Down in the Groove. Agree. I do like some of his albums with 80s production, but this is not one of them. He just toured with Petty, and you can hear that influence where he might be trying to do his own like Full Moon Fever type thing. And I absolutely hate Sadly Sue Brown. Next, I've got Knocked Out Loaded, kind of in the same vein of Down in the Groove. Really bad vocal mix. It doesn't sound like a Dylan album at all. Next, I've got Fallen Angels. I do like some stuff on here. It's cool. It's old school, but none of the songs are better than the originals, and it's not as good as Triplicate. And then at number 31, I've got Under the Red Sky. Everything you said, you forgot to mention just how bad Wiggle Wiggle is, and we talked about how bizarre it is as a first impression album opener. I also really think there's weird instrument choices here with accordion, like that carnival organ that's on some Dire Straits albums. Not terrible, but yeah. Those are my next 5.
All right, my next 5, 35 through 31. I've got at 35, Good As I've Been to You. This is him going back and doing sort of just traditional folk covers, just acoustic guitar and vocal. For me, he just doesn't feel like he's that into it. It feels like it's kind of tossed off. I think I read that maybe this and World Gone Wrong were done to just sort of fulfill the contract he was under. And I can see that it doesn't feel like his heart's really in it that much. But World Gone Wrong is my number 34, and I think it is significantly better than Good As I've Been to You. I like Blood in My Eyes a lot. Then I've got Christmas in the Heart. I actually kind of like it. It is a Christmas album, so I can't really justify putting it much higher, but better than a lot of Christmas albums, I would say. I would be more likely to listen to this at Christmas time than most.
What about the Hanson Christmas album?
I'll take this over that. At number 32, I have Tempest. Maybe one of the more surprising things on my list is how low I have this placed. I think a lot of the songs are too long and not interesting enough to warrant being that long, especially instrumentally. I feel like on some of the long tracks, it feels like they looped 4 bars. Like nothing happens or changes within the instrumentation. It's just him singing over what feels like a loop of music, and it gets really boring. Number 31 for me is Self-Portrait. There's some good stuff on here. I like it, but it doesn't work that well as an album. There's, live tracks. It feels like just an assortment of outtakes and doesn't work that well for me. But there are good tracks sprinkled throughout.
I have Self-Portrait at my number 30. Agree with everything you just said. It's not terrible, but it's not really good. Number 29, I've got Shot of Love. It's less preachy, and there's a couple good songs on it. I like Every Grain of Sand, but it's still too gospel-y for me. Number 28, I've got Tempest. I agree. It's just not that interesting. There's not inherently anything wrong with it. There's also some weird choppy vocals, and the songs just don't have a long-lasting effect for me. 27, I've got World Gone Wrong. I do think it's a little bit of a return to form for his sound, and there's some kind of cool acoustic guitar work. And then I've got the album that I think a lot of critics hated, but I don't have in my 30 to 37 range, Empire Burlesque. I like kind of the soul on this. It's a little more loose and wild than some of the other like 80s stuff, and some of like the gospel and like background vocals are more Stonesy than like Baptist gospel sounding stuff. So I kind of like it. It grooves a little more and has a little more soul to that.
All right. For me, 30, 29, and 28 are the 3 covers albums that he did recently, the Great American Songbook records. 30, I got Triplicate just because it's so long. It's tough to get through in one sitting. But again, good stuff. I like a lot of it. 29, Shadows in the Night. I have a little bit lower than Fallen Angels at 28 just because it's a little more downbeat. Fallen Angels a little more upbeat, and I don't know, I like it just a slightly bit more, but those 3 are almost interchangeable. At number 27, I have the self-titled debut, Bob Dylan, a really interesting record, mostly covers. I think it's just mostly interesting for historical purposes and seeing, the beginnings of what he would become. And at number 26, I have Knocked Out Loaded. A lot of good songs on this record, but it is one of the 80s records that suffers from kind of weird production. Brownsville Girl, though, is an amazing standout track, which I love, and I also really like They Killed Him. Great song, extremely hampered by bad production, cheesy synth, and allowing a child to sing one of the verses. But I've heard covers of it that are amazing. So it's a good song.
My number 25 is Good As I've Been to You. It's kind of a return to folk, a lot like World Gone Wrong, but there's more good songs. I think the first 3 songs are really good. Frankie and Albert, Jim Jones, and then Blackjack Davy. And then it just kind of falls off the cliff a little bit there. Number 24, I've got Together Through Life. I really like his energetic, raspy vocals here. There's some cool instrumentation, really deep bass, and some cool, just like simple snapping, tap your foot blues style to it. Again, a lot of these albums, not bad albums. It's Bob Dylan, so Christ, he's got 19 really good albums that are at least a B plus and up. 23, I've got Shadows in the Night. I love Autumn Leaves on here. It's not bad. It's a bit morose. I love the sound. It sounded really good on my headphones. Like, I think this whole trilogy of the covers have really good production on it, but I do agree with what you were saying about them. That said, I will have Triplicate much higher. Number 22, I've got Slow Train Comin'. It doesn't really sound like a Bob Dylan album to me. It sounds like a Dire Straits, Bob Seger, like mashup. It does have like a cool steely vibe, and Mark Knopfler is one of my favorite guitar players ever, so that's probably what I like most about it, is his guitar work. 21, I've got self-titled Bob Dylan. It's monumental, you gotta appreciate it, but a lot of covers. It's good for the genre, but there's going to be much better stuff.
Number 25 for me is going to be Empire Burlesque. I think there's a lot of really good songs on this record, but again, it's held back by the production choices. Number 24, I've got Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. It's kind of like a mood piece. It's good to put on in the background. It's not, like you said, nothing monumental here, but I like it. I find it enjoyable. Number 23, I have John Wesley Harding. Kind of a strange record for me. I don't know. I just have trouble getting into it or finding it very memorable. Over the years, I've listened to it a ton of times, and it just never sticks. I don't know what it is. It falls right in the midst of one of his strongest periods, and I just don't like it that much. Number 22, I have Together Through Life. I think instrumentally it's really interesting. I like sort of like the Zydeco influence, the accordion. There's some cool pedal steel on this record. I think the songwriting is just a tick weaker than the records that came before it. At number 21, I have Love and Theft. Out of those sort of trilogy of records, starting with Time Out of Mind, I think this is my least favorite. It just has the fewest songs that really blow me away. However, Mississippi is one of my all-time favorite Bob Dylan songs. So that's landing at 21.
All right, you're 25 through 21. We saw some missteps that you took there, but I'll fix that later. My number 20 is going to be New Morning. I do think it's pretty good. It does feel a little bit thin and not flushed out. There's some really good songs on it, and then I do think there's some filler, and especially for the time period that it's in, it just doesn't live up to the other stuff. Street Legal is going to be my 19. I do really like it because it's kind of like a more optimistic record than stuff he was doing at the time. It's got like these cool like Springsteen vibe, horns and vocals coming in. I do think he's trying too hard vocally at times, though. He's over-singing, which I don't think happens a lot on his records, but it does here. That said, I love Is Your Love in Vain. I love that song. Number 18 is going to be the new one, Rough and Rowdy Ways. I will say that I think this one might go up the list in years to come. But for now, I think 18 is a good placement. It's awesome. It's return to form. It's his first original stuff in a while. It's really meaningful, just not as good as the other 17. And 17, I've got Infidels, Knopfler again, baby. Really good guitar work, bassy and great. The little flicks and stuff Knopfler does on these albums and his own albums are awesome. 16 is tough. I think 16 and up are albums that I really like by Dylan. I wanted to get this in the top 15, but I didn't. 16 is going to be Planet Waves. It's very underrated. Love Never Say Goodbye. Love on a Night Like This. It's really good. A lot of people thought that his career was really winding down up until this era or this album. Forgive me if my timeline's a little off, but it was kind of a comeback album for him, and that's my number 16.
All right, top 20. I also have New Morning at number 20. A lot of great stuff on it, but there is a few kind of weird songs, kind of filler. I think it's very underrated, but again, I only have it at number 20, so maybe it's rated correctly. I don't know. Then we get maybe into some controversial territory. I've got at number 19, the Freewheelin Bob Dylan. I think about half or maybe 2/3 of this record is kind of like top shelf, but I think there's still maybe a few tracks that feel more like his first record, not fully formed Dylan yet. So that's where that's landing. Number 18, I've got Another Side of Bob Dylan. I think You know, his lyrics here are starting to turn a bit more surreal, and you can it sort of predicts what comes after it. But again, I think it's not as strong as the record that came before it. Number 17, I have Rough and Rowdy Ways, the new one. Maybe his strongest album lyrically ever. I don't know. It's really good lyrically. I think it's great, and as you said, I expect maybe it'll climb my list in years to come. Number 16, I have Time Out of Mind, sort of his comeback in the mid-late 90s. A lot of great songs, Make You Feel My Love, Not Dark Yet, a bunch of other great ones.
We're on the top 15 now. My number 15 is going to be his best cover album from a couple years ago, Triplicate. It is too long. It's objectively too long, but I don't think it's incredibly difficult to sit through. It kind of sedates you and sinks you into it, pulls you in, and after a while, you're just kind of fine with it. It really just encompasses your whole mood. Stormy Weather's really cool. I guess I'll have to change my plans. It's great. Bragging. P.S. I Love You. I like most of the stuff. I think I just like kind of the style and the direction and the choices that he makes on here, and I just think it's the best one of those three. It's really loungy, and he's marked so much of his vocals with different styles, and I think here he's really doing just like a cool cocktail lounge kind of vibe. Sounds like he's doing a Tony Bennett impression sometimes, but I just think it's really chill. I like it a lot. It's a different side of Dylan that you might only hear in touches of songs on other stuff. So I do like Triplicate a good bit.
All right, my number 15 is going to be Modern Times. I don't know, people might find it odd that I put it above Time Out of Mind and Love and Theft, which I think are records that get a little more attention usually. But this is the first new Dylan record that I ever got. Like, I got into Dylan right before this came out, so that could play into my slightly higher placement of this. But I think there's just a ton of great songs on it. Thunder on the Mountain's really cool. I love some of the slower tracks like Spirit on the Water and Nettie Moore, and not really any misfires on it either. I think the whole thing is strong.
I agree. Modern Times is going to be way later in this video for me. Maybe the latest. All right, my number 14 is Love and Theft. This is his big, like, late 90s, early 2000s return to form kind of era. It's got kind of a Highway 61 feel where it's the whole band like backing him up on his message. It's thicker, it's bassier, it's got that full blues rock band feel. The songs are really simple, but the playing's really tight, which I think is what he needed right now. There's really good variety, and it's sequenced well. It's one of his best put together albums. It's got a groovy, cool opener with Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and it goes into like more prettier melodic tunes like Mississippi, like Moonlight a lot. And then there's like Lonesome Day Blues. It's just kind of like an old school, heavier, just straight up blues song. And it's a really good length. It's nothing crazy good, but as a whole album, I think it's really good. I don't think there's a lot of songs for me that are going to contend for my favorite Dylan songs, but I think number 14 is right where Love and Theft should be for me.
Number 14 for me is going to be Slow Train Coming, the first of the so-called Born Again era. I don't know, you called some of them preachy, but I basically recoil in horror every time religion's mentioned, and these records don't bother me at all. I think they're great. Like you said, Mark Knopfler's fantastic on this record, but he is probably the best thing about the record. First two tracks are great, Gotta Serve Somebody and Precious Angel. The rest of the record's not at that same quality, but I think they're really enjoyable, and I just like the sound of them, and the production on it's really good. So this lands at 14 for me, but I do like this songwriting on the two subsequent religious records a little more than this one.
All right, my number 13 in the same realm as Love and Theft is going to be the one before Time Out of Mind, which I think is the kind of the masterwork of that 90s resurgence that he was doing. This sounds like it's a bunch of 60s Dylan songs just with modern production, and compared to Love and Theft, I think it's a little darker and moodier, kind of shadowy and hollow, dare I say even a little Neil Youngish. I really like Standing in the Doorway. I love Not Dark Yet, Make You Feel My Love, probably my favorite three on it. I just think it's got a little bit more emotional variety and depth than Love and Theft, but they're almost interchangeable for me.
Number 13 for me is going to be Infidels. Really like the songs on this record a lot, and especially love the sort of live versions he was doing. If you watch him on Letterman, when he does Joker Man. It's fantastic. I kind of wish the record ended up sounding like that. So the production here is a little bit of a drawback, but anytime I hear someone cover Joker Man, it's fantastic. It's just such a good song. It holds up no matter who's doing it. And I kind of feel that way about the majority of the songs on this record. I love Sweetheart Like You. I love License to Kill. Just a lot of really great songs. So yeah, that's landing at 13.
All right, my number 12, we're going old school. I'm going another side of Bob Dylan. This is kind of him dipping his feet and getting out of kind of the political protest stuff a little bit. And he's got some more lovely romantic like poetry type songs here, but it is split. You can really feel the pain and like the sentiment in some of his songs. And I think this is where he's starting to really get his best lyrics out. It's less about the movement, more about the passion. It Ain't Me, Babe, I Don't Believe You, and To Ramona, probably my favorites on it. I don't know. I know a lot of people kind of use this era of Dylan as like the mockery of his voice, but I do really like the youthful kind of swagger and confidence that he's got with his voice back here, and I think it shows up on this album a lot, especially since a lot of the more love songs or romantic songs are coming in a little bit.
And number 12 for me is going to be Shot of Love. This is probably maybe going through these records, these religious records are kind of the ones that blew me the way of the most this time through the discography. I've heard them all before, but I never really liked them as much as I do right now. I love Heart of Mine and In the Summertime. Even Property of Jesus I really like. So yeah, I like pretty much every song on this record. The production's not as good as it is on either of the other two records, but the songs are strong.
I don't know, man. It sounds like these records did exactly what they were supposed to do and have converted you into, you're going to be at a big super evangelical church next Sunday. It's falling over, I can tell. All right, my number 11 is going to be The Times They Are Changin'. Really good, original protest tunes, politically charged, but peaceful in nature. Kind of talked about that when we did the Clash Listography about how like protest music can started off really peacefully and then it got really aggressive. The title track's so iconic, it really marked the American social scene, this album, and I think his cultural influence is really sticking out here. I love One Too Many Mornings, North Country Blues, really cool. Just outside of my top 10. I might be at fault of just kind of respecting it more than I like it, so it maybe should be a little bit more in the teens, but I'm sticking to it. I do enjoy it and admire it quite a bit. So number 11, The Times They Are A-Changin'.
Number 11 for me is going to be Saved. This came out in 1980, but the production on it is still kind of has that 70s vibe. It's probably the most gospel-y of the three Born Again records. I like the songs a lot. I think the vocal performances are all great, and I think the keyboard solo on Covenant Woman is maybe the best instrumental passage on any Bob Dylan track. It's phenomenal.
Saved, huh? This high up, oof, over modern times.
Oh yeah, big time.
Lord, please help Jason. All right, number 10, I've got Freewheelin Bob Dylan, one of the best album covers of all time, and it's just him walking through, I think it's, Soho, with his lady on his arm. I don't know where he is, but it's an iconic album cover. The rest of the album is very good too. It's a lot like The Times They Are A-Changin' in a way with the sound, but it has more of a southern feel. It's kind of angrier at times with like Masters of War, and I like this is where his like diction and rhythm of his folk speak is really on point. Pretty good version of Girl from the North Country. He'll have a better one later. Blown in the Wind, Karina, all really good stuff. I think this is the perfect album to mark the top 10 essential Bob Dylan albums.
I'm going to get my top 10 started with an album that landed in between my two least favorite Bob Dylan albums. That's Oh Mercy. Daniel Lanois came in to produce, and just that's exactly what he needed at that time. He wrote a great batch of songs, and they just sound fantastic on this record. I love Most of the Time, Ring Them Bells, Man in a Long Black Coat. I think it's maybe song for song his strongest work of the 80s.
I would agree with that. I'll be talking about that shortly as well, but I'm really surprised how low you had my number 9, John Wesley Harding. I think in the middle of a lot of his great albums, this one gets kind of lost, but it's still a really good album. I do think it's a really nice, like, full realization of his band performance. Even though there's less electric stuff, it's kind of just like got this, like, when did this album come out? Like 67, 68. I think it's an early kind of predecessor on what a lot of like the mid 70s, like Jackson Browne, Bob Seger type stuff will sound like, with the way that the acoustic, and the piano are all kind of playing. Really good rhythm, more of like a rock folk band here. I think he's going more to his original stuff by now, to kind of trying to appease his earlier fans a little bit more, but the songs rule. I love the title track, All Along the Watchtower, The Wicked Messenger. I really love that. As I Went Out One Morning is great as well. I think there's a lot of, not very many bad songs, but also not like his Mount Rushmore of stuff. It's like just B+, A- songs all the way through. He's got better. It's a number 9.
My number 9 is going to be The Times They Are A-Changin'. This is my favorite of his first 4 folk albums. This is probably the peak of his sort of protest songwriting and his socially conscious writing. Just a lot of really good songs. I think it's better than Freewheelin', and I think it's also more consistent than Another Side, even though Another Side might have a couple songs that are stronger than anything on this one.
Fair assessment, my friend. I think this is one that I'm going to have at number 8, which a lot of people consider a top 5 or maybe even a top 3. Maybe even a number 1 for a small minority of folks, but I've got Bringing It All Back Home at number 8. I think it does suffer a little bit of being the same year as Highway 61, which I think a lot of people hold above it a little bit, which I certainly do. But, I mean, there's no doubt there are some killer songs on this album. She Belongs to Me, Maggie's Farm, Subterranean Homesick Blues. I like it a lot. I also do think the second half of it is not quite as good as the first, so that's why it suffers a little bit for me. And Mr. Tambourine Man, along with Knocking on Heaven's Door, is one of my least favorite Dylan big hits. But it's got that awesome classic Dylan vocal approach, the same kind of feel as Highway 61, where he's gone electric and has the band pumping a little bit. It's just not quite as celebratory and lively as Highway for me, but I mean, it's as strong as a number 8 for most artists. It's pretty damn good. I believe we both did have it nominated for our Albums of the Year 65. It's killer. 7 better. Number 8, Bringing It All Back Home.
So while some of the sort of late 70s, early 80s stuff has really climbed my list on this most recent trip through his discography, couple records have dropped a little bit, and one of those would be my number 8, which is Desire. Probably would have landed in my top 5 had we done this a couple years ago. Really great record, though. Follow up to his fantastic Blood on the Tracks. It's got a different vibe to it than most Dylan records. It's got Scarlett Rivera on fiddle, which definitely brings a different sort of dimension and sound to the record. It's kind of got that sort of gypsy vibe to it. Lyrically, I think it's a little different than most of his stuff as well. Tracks like One More Cup of Coffee are kind of unique in his catalog as far as the lyrics go. I do really like it, but it's just not hitting me on the same level that it used to for whatever reason.
It's hitting me on roughly the same level it always has. I've got it at number 7. I would love to put it higher, just can't because of the competition. But you're right. After Blood on the Tracks, I think he kind of found himself again, and he's like having fun on this album. He's experimenting a little bit, and it's really pulsating. It's lively attitude. It's a little cocky, which I think he was missing on a lot. I think that's what's great about his a lot of earlier stuff is he's very cocky, and it works on this. I love kind of the melody and the choppy harmonies, especially on Mozambique. That will probably mention in my top 10 songs. It's awesome. I'd love to put it higher, just can't. And you're right, the songwriting is a little more unusual here compared to his other stuff like Black Diamond Bay. It's really good album. And I know I think you said before that you really like 70s Dylan the most. And to me, this and Blood on the Tracks is the argument for that. They're the deluxe 70s stuff of his.
Well, I've got a few other 70s records still in the mix. One of those being my number 7, which is Planet Waves. For as much talk about his association with the band, it's sort of interesting that this is the only studio record that they actually play on, and it's just great. It feels like a band record almost, with Dylan singing. I like the songs on it. Back-to-back versions of Forever Young is a little bit of a strange move and sequencing, but other than that, it's fantastic. Something There Is About You, Hazel, Tough Mama, lots of good songs.
My number 6 is going to be Modern Times. I don't think this was the first Dylan album I got into. I think it was Nashville or Blonde on Blonde. But this was the mark of my biggest Dylan phase when I was like 19 or 20. I really started to like this album a lot. Then I'm Not There came out, and I fell in love with that movie, and I fell in love with Dylan, and I started to like this album even more, and I think it still holds up. And I haven't really listened to it much probably in the last 12 years. So listening to it again was a real treat. It's got kind of like this jazzy folk vibe with like a little bit turned up electric, but it's chill. It's got a kind of a new vocal approach, and I love some of the guitar on it, like those twangy Hawaiian slide sounds, especially on Spirit of the Water. Love the Alicia Keys call out right off the bat with Thunder Mountain. Really cool. Kind of, it might be a little pathetic of him just trying to stay relevant, but it works because he's a great lyricist. And then my favorite on it is probably Rollin' and Tumblin', just this exactly what it sounds like, Rollin' and Tumblin', rock and blues. A lot of underrated playing on it with great blues ballads. And then Working Man Blues number 2 is a great song, probably my number 11. It's kind of this cheerful blue-collar-y type song. You know, a lot of his stuff by now he's kind of said already, but in this song he's taking a bit of a different perspective and look at it, which I kind of liked. So if you don't know this album, I do think it's the best of his new stuff of the past 30 years. It got a lot of praise when it came out, and rightfully so. And I want to shout out, I think during the mid-2000s, there were a lot of kind of revival albums by classic rock artists. You know, Springsteen did a really good album. 2 of them, really. I like Devils and Dust and The Rising. So this kind of falls into that category. And a decade that I think was really good for music. There were a lot of old school guys and girls putting out really good stuff as well.
Number 6. The record that I think is the most underrated Bob Dylan record, also from the 70s. I'm going with Street Legal. I think every single song on this record is awesome, and I absolutely love the production on it. Very 70s, maybe the most 70s sounding record. It's got, you know, congas, bongos, saxophone. It's got the female backing vocals, which are great. It kind of is a transitional record away from sort of the mid-70s Planet Waves era towards what he would do on the Born Again records. And in that transition, he just like hits a sweet spot for me, and I absolutely love it. So many great songs. Literally every single song on this record I love. You know, I could even see this climbing higher on my list into the top 5 in the future.
Very nice. My number 5 is going to be a surprise. I don't think it's in most people's top 5, but I've got Oh Mercy as a solid number 5. It's the best 80s album. It has a lot of production on it, but none of the bad, cheesy 80s stuff. It's got really good, restrained, focused atmosphere to it. It doesn't sound like any other Dylan album. It's kind of casual, and it's got this shimmeriness, especially in some of the guitar. A little more treble than any other Dylan album, which I usually like, but it doesn't mean that there's no bass. It's still there. And I love kind of the percussive production elements, like you said, bongos and congos are on this as well. Really tight lyrics, kind of simpler than, you know, he doesn't have that jargon and that syntax that he usually has. It's kind of just more, you know, simple, quick phrase, blues style. And the music does a lot of the talking here, but there's not a bad song on it. I absolutely love most of the time, mainly because I loved High Fidelity, and I was like, this is Bob Dylan? What the hell is this? I was like 15 or so, and I loved the rest of the album. Political World's great, Disease Conceit, Everything is Broken, Ring Them Bells. It's really good all the way through, and without a doubt, my favorite sounding Dylan album as a whole. Easily the best produced album, the best production, and the musicianship and the songwriting lives up to it too. So as a whole, this is a strong number 5 for me.
All right, now we're getting into the top 5, and I've got Nashville Skyline at my number 5. Absolutely love this record. I love, you know, he's starting to actually record in Nashville and playing with a bunch of session musicians, and, you know, they nail the sound that he's going for. I love, you know, the way he sings on this record is so different and unique. He's got sort of that froggy croon, so cool. And, you know, I would love to put this higher, but I mean, you just can't. The other 4 are just too good.
Yeah, I agree. Now that I'm in the top 4, it'll probably be the tightest top 4 of any listography we do. 10 years ago, my number 4 was a solid number 1 favorite Dylan album. Now it's at number 4, but it is literally like forerunners crossing the line and just whoever has the longest piece of hair getting. This was tough. The top 4 was so tough. So no matter what I'm about to say, it's going to piss off some people, and it's going to piss off myself more than anybody. My number 4 is Blonde on Blonde, which is awesome. It's a 1D. It's one of the best albums ever. It's this amazing folk pop romantic poetry. It's his first album that's really super melodic. There's a lot of emotion. My favorite thing about this album is just talking a lot about his cockiness before, but this one has some like vulnerability and affection and honesty in it. And it's a little bit self-conscious. He's like not as confident personalizing this album as much as he is. And I think it comes out and it's awesome. I could name all of the great songs on it, but that would just be listing all of the track listing on a double album. So I'm not going to put anyone through that. They're all awesome. Some of it will show up in my top songs. This is one of the best albums ever. I will defend why my number 3 is in 3 instead of 4 once I can. But for now, number 4 is Blonde on Blonde. And even now that I say it out loud, I'm like, no, it's number 1. But it's not.
All right. Yeah. I mean, everyone's got their favorite Dylan album, and I don't know, can't please everybody. So no matter what we do, we're going to probably upset some people, and it's super difficult. There's very little separating any of these, like you said. So my number 4 is going to be Highway 61 Revisited. Monumentally important in the history of rock music, like a Rolling Stone alone. I mean, you could write a book on just that song. You know, I think around this time, he was kind of elevating what rock music could be and marrying it with the sort of folk and poetry. And he really kind of made rock and roll what it became, you know, more than just dance music for teenagers. I mean, this really kind of intellectualized it, and at the same time, I don't know, made folk more mainstream. It changed the whole game for everybody, and it's hard to put it at number 4, but that's how it goes.
That is how the cookie crumbles. My number 3, I have Nashville Skyline. Objectively, the songwriting on Blonde on Blonde is better, but this is probably my favorite country-sounding album of all time. You already kind of touched on it. The musicianship and the studio stuff they did in Nashville captures this sound to me better than just about anything else that's ever been done. Also, my favorite Dylan voice ever. You can pick from the 6 or 7 different things that he does throughout his career. This one is my favorite. I love the production. Compared to Blonde on Blonde, it's kind of easy breezy, very chill, sunny vibes, but cool, relaxed playing. Songs are really light and soulful, where Blonde on Blonde is kind of like this vigorous passion, and this one is, you know, not putting your foot on the brake, but just driving at a slower speed. One of my favorite moments ever is on this album when he says, "Darling, I'm counting on you, and tell me that isn't time." All of the songs on here are great. Right off the bat with this version of Girl from the North Country is just beautiful and whimsical. I love it all the way through. Very close to switching it with Blonde on Blonde, but I just think the sound is what puts it over the edge for me.
Okay, number 3 for me is going to be Bringing It All Back Home. I think you're right that most people probably do put Highway 61 ahead of this, but for me, this has a little more of the earlier folk elements still. There's still some like fairly folky songs, and I think it makes for a more balanced listening experience. I really love a lot of the sort of more subdued tracks like She Belongs to Me, Love Minus Zero, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. You know, some of the deep cuts as well, like Bob Dylan's 115th Dream, are great as well. Subterranean Homesick Blues is awesome. I just like it, you know, like you said, a hair better than Highway 61.
Yeah, if you're keeping score at home, we're down to the bottom 2. And there is a chance we land on the same number 1 as of right now. Through a 37 album catalog, we could get the same one and have to check in with Joe for a trifecta. Joe is on standby, but not for long. My number 2 is Blood on the Tracks. Probably his most all-encompassing Dylan sound, his most everything you want from Dylan is on here. I think it's his most complete and just kind of like mature professional album. I think this is him finding himself as a professional musician when he really needed to. Like, he had started to have some cracks in his work, as a lot of people thought or said. You're Gonna Make Me Lonesome, When You Go, If You See Her, Say Hello, Shelter from the Storm, Buckets of Rain, they're all just a masterclass of songwriting. And the production behind it is simple, it's elegant, it's understated, it is perfect. I think this is the album that really made him the icon that he is all time, because he did have, leading up to this, some failures and some hardships, and he recovered. And that's, I think, the mark of a great artist. Evolution is key, and this is the album where I think he kind of just took his career back. And if this was his first album, he wouldn't be the Bob Dylan we know, but he would still be great from this album on. So I think it's probably his most important album, not in the history of music, but for him personally. This is the album he needed to make. It's perfect. And it's an easy number one, but I've got it at number two, Blood on the Tracks.
Yeah, we were texting back and forth about what our number ones might be, but we didn't reveal. But you were correct in your assumption. My number two is Blonde on Blonde, just an incredible album, a double album, no less. For me, there is one flaw to this record, and that is opening with Rainy Day Women. I wish it closed the record. For me, a weird way to start the record. And as somebody who almost exclusively only listens to albums straight through from beginning to end, it's a slight deterrent for me to put this one on. Extremely nitpicky, but when you're at this echelon of great Dylan albums, that's all it really takes to land at number two. But so many great songs, so many of my favorite Dylan songs. Number two.
I think that's a great point, which I should have made, because I have thought that, it should be an album closer, should be a set list closer. It has none of the properties that I really think belong as an album opener, especially on this album. The rest of the album doesn't really go with this song. But my number one is going to be my favorite album of 1965, Highway 61 Revisited. I love everything you said about it. It is kind of the marriage of all of these things, which would kind of be the roots of what we call rock and roll. I think as far as popular rock music goes, I mean, the core elements were here before, with Southern blues musicians and soul and Motown and all of this stuff. But for popular rock as we know it today, I think the Beatles were the talent and Dylan was kind of the heart. And obviously, the Beatles would bring in heart later. I'm not saying they didn't have any heart. They write some of the best, loveliest songs ever. But I think for 1965, this is what happened. And Dylan was kind of that big American voice. This album has so much rock swagger to it. There are bands that glam out and grow their hair long and cock rock it out in the 80s and do 12-minute guitar solos that can't touch the level of attitude that Dylan has on this album, with the whole Southern blues feel and the honky tonk. It's great. The songs aren't celebratory in nature, but there's very joyous playing here. I absolutely love it. Some of the stuff is done hard, done soft, done soulfully. It's rebellious in nature and kind of marks the 60s vibe, especially with its kind of like biblical undertones. He's acting like a prophet here, which is about as cocky as you can get in mainstream American culture for this time. Not a bad song on it. Ballad of Thin Man and Like a Rolling Stone are probably in my top 20, 30 songs of all time. Queen Jane approximately, go on and on. I think this is just the best playing and one of the best important rock albums of all time. It's my favorite to listen to straight through. I love the vibe it gives me. Highway 61 Revisited, number one. But like I said, the top four, if we did this again in a month, it could be number four. But right now it's number one.
Well, I've only got one left. It's got to be Blood on the Tracks at number one for me. So where Blonde on Blonde is sort of sprawling, this is more concise. I think this is sort of like the clearest, most concise vision that he's ever put down on wax. Some say it's an autobiographical account of his estrangement from his wife, Sarah. He denies that, but, whatever the songs are about, they are fantastic. 2 different recording sessions. I believe half the record was recorded in New York and the other half recorded in Minneapolis, but it all works together perfectly, completely cohesive, and I think a really, really good place to start if you haven't listened to Dylan before, or if you have listened to Dylan before and haven't been able to get over the hurdle of his voice that, you know, makes it difficult for some people to get into his music. I think this is the best sort of primer to get you going on Dylan. And you said everything else there is to say about it. Just the quality of songs, top notch the whole way through. I really can't find any flaws in it. So number one for me.
Pretty good list. It'll be interesting to see how our lists compiled against one another. Yeah, the top heavy hitters are classically heavy hitters for a reason. But then, like, the great thing about his catalog is you can find those little diamonds in the rough. Like for you, it's like Street Legal, and you know, for me, it's Modern Times or Oh Mercy, which I like more than Bringing It All Back Home, which Rolling Stone magazine or whatever Metacritic compilation of rankings you want to do would be like, nah, son. But for me, it's great. I mean, and you consider like a lot of artists, especially bands, to kind of evolve, hit a peak sound and era, and then kind of maybe have some stuff after that or before it. But Dylan kind of operates differently. I mean, he's definitely evolved, but they're just such separate chunks and eras that they kind of move in waves within themselves rather than this giant 40-year epic, you know, one big peak and out. I think you can just pick a 5-year span and find a good album from 82 to 87 or 69 to 75. You know, it's really impressive. And the new album's really good too. I mean, I feel bad having it this low. I'm sure it'll be on one of our staff picks soon, but it's really good.
Yeah, I would reinforce that sentiment that the new album is really good, and if you haven't listened to it yet, everyone should go check it out because it's top notch. Like I said, I think it's one of his best lyrical albums of all time. So, well, that was interesting. We got a couple more videos coming up. We're going to talk about our favorite Dylan songs. We're also going to talk about some less than conventional singers in our third video. So as always, like the video, subscribe, hit the bell to get notifications, comment below on what you thought of our lists and maybe what your list is as well if you've got one. And we'll see you in the next video.